Hi guys. Right now, you are on the step on the hyperdoc where we consider the relationship between mood and setting. Some of you have already discussed mood when we talked about imagery a few weeks ago. If you remember, it is the feeling or atmosphere that a writer creates for readers. If you were not part of that group, think about it this way. When people ask what kind of mood you're in, they want to know how are you feeling. Authors do that when they write. They want their readers to feel a certain way. Mood can be described as exciting, somber, terrifying, cheerful, carefree. Really, there is no right mood. It is how well you can explain yourself. If I read something, my mood may be different than somebody else. However, if I am a writer, I'm going to choose my words carefully in order to create this mood. If I want to create a scary mood, I'm not going to use light and fluffy words. I may say something like this: it was a dark and stormy night. A very common beginning to a scary story. How does mood relate to setting? Well, both setting and mood make you feel as if you are there in the stories you read. This makes reading a lot more interesting if you can put yourself in the setting. So mood is created three ways. The first is just a simple description of setting. So ask yourself, where does it take place? The writer's choice of setting and the words he or she uses to describe it can create mood. So let's look at this example here. The forest at the edge of town was even more ominous at night. By the way, ominous means like kind of spooky. It looks like something bad might happen. Think of like an omen. There wasn't a house or store within 2 miles. Okay, so already we know that where our character is, there's no one around to help. So far, no one in Jake's class had been brave enough to explore it. So right there, they're telling you that this place, no one in Jake's class had been brave enough, which means that it is probably pretty scary if you hadn't already picked that up from the first two sentences. So now comes imagery. Imagery we've talked about, you should know it. But now I want you to see, how does it relate to setting? So we already know that imagery is language that appeals to your 5 senses. Well, it can also affect your emotions and establish a mood. So if we look over here, my example, he walked hesitantly, leaves crunching under his feet. Okay, that appeals to my sense of hearing. I can hear that. Bare trees hovered over him. Ooh, well, I know they're not really hovering. I wouldn't take that literally, but I can imagine them covering him, casting arm-like shadows. Ooh, that's personification across his path. So I can see these scary, skinny shadows, and I can hear the leaves crunching. His heart hammered in his chest. Okay, well, we know it's not really hammering, but it means it's beating really quickly, which means he's scared. So his heart is hammering in his chest as he inched forward. So I want you to be aware, similes, metaphors, and personification all make up imagery. They're rarely separated into 4 categories, like you saw in your test. When you're actually reading something, they all come together. So at this time, you should have All Summer in a Day handy. All right, I want you to be thinking, where is an example of figurative language you found in this story? How can you explain how it helps create imagery? So that is something we will do in just a minute. The last point I want to bring up is the descriptions of characters' speech or feelings. So it is exactly what it sounds like. What are the characters feeling? What are they saying? Are they joyful, scared, depressed? Sometimes the characters' reactions reflect the mood the writer is trying to create. So think about Margot, right? Okay, she is very distant from her classmates. She isn't like them. She is lost almost in her own world, her memories of Earth. That kind of creates this somber mood. You know, it's always raining on Venus, and the kids don't know any different, but Margot does. That really gets to the reader because we know what the sun is. We can feel for Margot. So here's the example. Jake couldn't believe he accepted the dare. What was I thinking? He muttered to himself. Okay, so that's character speech. Stopping himself when he heard approaching footsteps. Fear paralyzed him. Ooh, that's a strong word right there. Now, fear is paralyzing him, me, the reader. I'm probably a little anxious too. I want to see what happens next. So what I'd like you to do, you are going to follow the link on the HyperDoc to today's meet. So right now, I want you to grab your copy of All Summer in a Day, and I want you to choose an example of figurative language that you marked. Remember, if you can't remember or you're struggling, go to the Padlet that's posted on Classroom. So just a quick refresher, you can go in, for example, this is period 4. Okay, if you would like to see what your classmates have already brainstormed, please feel free. So when you go to the HyperDoc, okay, you are going to see a link on step 2. This is where you are to today's meet. Okay, you're going to click it. You are going to have to choose a nickname. I am Miss W. Please make sure that you give your first name. You don't need to give your last name, but I do want to see your thoughts. So please don't make a nickname that I won't have any idea who you are. So let's see. I wonder if he'll let me do Miss W again. Okay. Now you notice that your characters are limited to 140, so you may have to split it up. So here are my instructions. Please choose one example of imagery from All Summer in a Day. Explain how this example helps develop the setting and or help you understand the story better. Remember, your example of imagery could be simile, metaphor, personification. As long as you explain how it helps you to understand the setting, that's what I want. So I'm going to use my example, the children press to each other like so many roses, so many weeds intermixed, peering out for a look at the sun. Be sure you put the page number in parentheses. Mine was the first page, but on my packet, that is page 155. I only have 17 characters remaining, so I'm going to go ahead and say this. Now I'm going to explain how does that help me understand the setting. Okay, so if you look back in your notes, oops. Okay, so if I look back in my notes, all right, I can see how these children are just pressed together. And that was actually a simile that I gave, but that's okay. So I know that the children are very anxious to see the sun. I know they're anxious because they're pressing up against each other. So I'm going to say this simile helps me understand how anxious and excited the children are to see the sun. Okay. Now, as you give your thoughts, okay, you are more than welcome to respond to somebody else's, if that you agree with them, say why, or if you have a question. The one thing I do ask is I am a part of this conversation, so please keep everything positive and respectful, and raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, good luck.